The episode opens up with Thule requesting Glenn and Saphentite to go to the Harpies village and conduct a regular checkup on them. Surprisingly, Thessalia proposes to help them and mentions that she's also traveling to the same village. In the next scene, we see Thessalia pulling the carriage with Dr. Glenn and Saphentite inside to take them to their destination, Harpies village. Glenn expresses his astonishment at Thule's sudden request and remembers Illy, the harpy whom he treated before. Saphentite informs Glenn that Illy has returned to her village and is facing some problems with her feathers, making her unable to fly. While Thessalia is using all her might to pull the carriage on a steep hill, she hears a rumbling noise coming from the upper part of the hill. Suddenly, a huge rock rolls down the hill and falls near Thessalia. Kay and Lorna, who are accompanying Thessalia, notice this, and they jump on top of Thessalia to save her from the falling rock. The two manage to keep Thessalia safe, but sadly, Kay ends up hurting herself. Glenn and Saphentite also hear a loud bang, and he rushes toward Thessalia and the group. When he finds out that Kay is injured, he tries to provide her with first aid, but despite this, she's unable to stand. Glenn then states that they can provide proper treatment to her only after reaching the village. To their good luck, a group of male harpies arrives there, mentioning that they're there to help them. Glenn asks them to take Kay to the village first and begin her treatment. The male harpies are so obedient that they immediately carry Kay and fly toward their village. Later, when Glenn and the rest arrive at the village and tells Glenn that they have arranged a small place for them to stay. He also suggests that Glenn get some rest and begin checking up on the harpies as soon as possible. Before Dr. Glenn leaves, Thessalia asks Lorna to look after Kay, while she talks about some business with the village chief. In the following scene, Glenn visits Kay and tells her that she has a sprain on her knees and needs to rest. Hearing this, Lorna assures Kay that she will take care of Thessalia while she recovers from her injury. Saphentite also asks Lorna to stop forcing herself to get up, as it will decrease her rate of recovery. The next day, Glenn starts treating the villagers, and Saphentite can be seen helping him. Right then, the group of harpies that Glenn and the others rescued come to visit him to thank him for his help. Here, Glenn asks them about Illy, but they tell him that Illy does not want to see him. Surprised, Glenn walks out of the place and meets Lorna on his way. He asks her what she's doing there, and Lorna replies to him that she's there with Thessalia, despite her being nowhere around. Moments later, Thessalia arrives there looking for Lorna and scolds her for wandering off without informing her. At night, Thessalia joins Glenn and Saphentite for dinner and tells them everything about Lorna and her changing behavior. Thessalia mentions that Lorna has started getting lost in thought because of continuous thinking about Kay's miserable health. Out of nowhere, she asks Glenn to conduct a thorough check on Lorna. Thessalia also tells Glenn that she, Lorna, and Kay have been friends since childhood, and she doesn't want to lose her. At first, Dr. Glenn refuses, but later, when Thessalia gives Saphentite a bottle of wine, she pressures Glenn and compels him to accept the offer. Later at night, Glenn alone sits around a table and reads his medical book. At the same time, Saphentite approaches him and suggests that they need to treat Lorna with alternative measures because she seems very sensitive. As soon as Glenn hears this, he takes out an old book and gets an idea to help Lorna get better. The following day, Glenn, Saphentite, and Thessalia enter Lorna's room and blindfold her. Glenn then begins tying Lorna's body and starts pulling a rope tied to her chest while she's still blindfolded. Glenn is doing all this because he had read about the technique to train the centaurs about getting mature and focused. Lorna also cooperates with him and does all the activities without even complaining. Rather than feeling awkward about the treatment, Lorna tells her that she's enjoying the process and assures Glenn to continue. After the treatment, Thessalia approaches Lorna and asks her if she's okay. Lorna replies that because of the procedure, she's now feeling a weight off her chest and can fully concentrate on protecting and serving Thessalia. Hearing this reply, Saphentite tells Glenn that his method is actually very effective and is producing positive results. Right then, Thessalia hugs Lorna and reveals to her that she's very lucky to have her in her life and does not want to lose her. Lorna says the same and just wants Thessalia to be happy. In the next scene, Glenn goes to check on Kay along with blindfolded Lorna. After her checkup, Kay asks Lorna about the reason for her being blindfolded. Lorna replies that it was Glenn's idea and she's enjoying it. Hearing this, Lorna comes closer to Glenn and tells him that he's been helping them a lot. Glenn states that Thessalia has already paid him for their treatment, but still, the girl starts seducing him, telling him that they need to pay him for his kind help. Kay also mentions that if he gets married to Thessalia in the future, then they will be his attendants and he their master. Soon, the girls press Glenn between their chests and ask him if he's enjoying it. Glenn then immediately immediately refuses their proposal and walks away from there, not before mentioning that Thessalia will get very angry at their behavior. Surprisingly, Kay and Lorna reveal that they were just pranking him and it was all a joke. The following day, Glenn, Saphentite, and Thessalia are making their way to meet Illy, the same harpy whom they rescued from the bandits. Illy has been refusing to visit the doctor and didn't show up at his clinic for regular treatment. Soon, the group approaches a small hut, and Thessalia tells Glenn that Illy is waiting for him inside. Sadly, when Glenn opens the door, he notices feathers all over the floor and Illy sitting in the corner with her body covered. Glenn quickly examines the feathers and approaches Illy. He learns that ever since being rescued from the bandits, Illy has been unable to fly and is shedding feathers more than normal. Without wasting any time, Glenn begins checking Illy and measuring her body temperature. Out of nowhere, he puts his hands between Illy's underarms for the sake of taking an accurate temperature. Because of this, Illy feels uncomfortable and throws his hands away. She also asks him why he does not use a thermometer to check her temperature. In reply, Glenn states that the thermometer is fragile and not reliable. After the checkup, Glenn concludes that Illy is not suffering from any disease and mentions that she's just molting and shedding feathers to get new ones. However, Illy is not ready to accept this conclusion and tells Glenn that he hasn't checked her properly. She states that when she molted before, there was no effect on her flying. Hearing this, Glenn tries to make her understand that this time she has shedded more feathers, making her unable to fly. To Illy's dismay, she does not accept the decision and angrily walks out of the room. Thessalia then tells Glenn that she'll talk to Illy and take care of her. In the following scene, Thessalia meets Illy at the riverside and asks her if she's okay. Here, Illy tells her that she just visited Glenn so that he would get a chance to meet her in person. When Thessalia asks about the reason, Illy reveals to her that she wants to be a gladiator like her, since she loves to fight and compete. Listening to this, Thessalia assumes that Illy must be her fan and tries to tell her that competing in the arena is not as simple as it looks. However, Illy makes it clear that she is not a fan of Thessalia's skills and just wants to be a gladiator. Thessalia tries to make her understand that whatever happens in the arena is not just fighting, but also discipline. To her dismay, Illy doesn't listen to her and rudely mentions that they just need to beat the opponents at any cost to be declared a winner. Illy's arrogant words make Thessalia angry and she challenges her to a fight. Surprisingly, Illy agrees to the challenge and takes her position. The scene then shifts to Dr. Glenn checking up on Thessalia and asking her why she fought with Illy in the first place. Thessalia tries to explain to him that she did it to shut Illy's mouth as she was speaking foul about Dr. Glenn. Right then, Thessalia offers a feather that she claims to be of Lily. She hands it over to Glenn and asks him to examine it, mentioning that she managed to get one during her fight with Illy. As soon as Glenn takes a look at the feather, he deduces something and asks the ladies to help him the following day. The following day, Glenn, Saphentite, and Thessalia arrive at the place where Thessalia fought with Illy the previous day. Glenn then suggests they gather all the feathers of Illy that they can find here. Here, Thessalia informs Glenn that Illy has the urge to leave the village and move out to another place, since she doesn't feel safe there. Glenn looks at Illy's feathers and concludes that her feathers are shedding because of some other reason. Out of nowhere, a harpy male arrived and informs the group about missing Illy. He mentions that Illy is nowhere to be found in the village, and they believe that she's flown out of there without informing anyone. As soon as Glenn hears this, he urges Saphentite and Thessalia to go out and search for her. On the other hand, Illy can be seen flying carelessly around the village and to the arena to watch other people fight. She says that till she can fly, she wants to keep flying and go around the world. Suddenly, while she's flying towards a hill, her vision gets blurred and Illy falls to the ground. She tries to fly again but fails and starts crying, sitting on a branch of a tree. Later at night, Saphentite, Glenn, and Thessalia come searching for her in the same forest, and after a bit of a struggle, they manage to locate Illy. At first, Illy gets angry at Glenn for not being able to point out her disease, but later, when Glenn tells her that her shedding is not normal this time, she calms down. Glenn then reveals to her that she has the blood of a phoenix inside of her and will soon grow some colorful wings to be able to fly again. Parallel to this scene, we're shown Thule talking to Skady about Illy's feather shedding problem. Here, we learn that Thule is already well aware that Illy is not ill and just wanted to check the ability of Glenn to solve the problem. After a few days, Glenn's prediction turns out to be true, and Illy shows up with her new, colorful phoenix feather. She also states that she's able to fly again and runs around to show her new feathers to others. When Illy takes flight, one of her new feathers falls near Glenn, but surprisingly, when he tries to catch it, he feels burning hot, making him suspect that Illy might be closer to being a phoenix than he assumed. In the next scene, after giving a lesson to the harpies about how to take care care of their feathers. Glynn and Saphentite start preparing for their return to Lindworm. They mention that they need to return to their clinic to continue serving other monsters. At the same time, Illy breaks into their place, flying through the window covered in slime-like material. She tells Glynn that she got caught in the slime while she was flying around the forest. Glynn takes a closer look at the slime and deduces that it's not regular slime, but a silky material supposed to be secreted by Arachne, a half-human, half-spider woman. Glynn suggests Illy take a bath with hot water to get rid of the slimy stuff. When more harpies start visiting the temporary clinic covered in silk, Glynn and Saphentite are compelled to visit the forest and deduce the main cause of the problem. Later, they arrive at the forest and notice that it's covered in silky thread, making it impossible for harpies to avoid them. While searching for Arachne in the forest, Glynn suddenly falls into a trap set by Arachne, hanging him upside down. After this, Arania, Saphentite and Arachne's best friend, reveals and introduces herself. She tells Glynn that she is Saphentite's fashion designer and is responsible for all of her designer clothes. Saphentite then tells Glynn that Arania is the owner of the loose silk sewing company in Lindworm and designs clothes for monsters. Later, Saphentite asks Arania about her visit to the village, and she replies that she's there to meet the harpies in person, especially the one with phoenix feathers, for her design. She also states that she has actually set traps to capture the harpies, and Glynn accidentally fell into one. Soon, when Saphentite tells Arania that there are a lot of harpies in the nearby village, she becomes very happy. In the next scene, Saphentite and Glynn take Arania to the village and let her meet Illy. Arania becomes very excited as soon as she sees Illy in her new phoenix feather. Though Arania approaches Illy and asks to let her caress her feathers just once, Illy gets afraid of her appearance and runs away from there. Arania chases her into the forest and spits her silk on Thessalia, who comes her way. In the evening, realizing that Saphentite has been working hard to keep up the good work, Glynn approaches her and asks her to take a dip in the hot water spring to relax. At first, Saphentite refuses to go there, but when Glynn tells her that Lorna and Kay will also be there, she agrees. Moreover, the hot water spring would also do good for her health. Using this opportunity, Arania visits the temporary clinic and finds Glynn all alone. She pretends to have a fever and later asks Glynn to accompany her for a walk in the forest. Glynn agrees to her request and walks alongside her, but when he feels like Arania is absolutely fine, he decides to return to his own clinic. Sadly, when he tries to return, he stumbles upon one of the traps set by Arania and gets captured. Arania then reveals her real motive to come after Glynn. She says that she wants to be Glynn's girlfriend and co-own him with Saphentite. She believes that doing so will help her get new ideas and improve her creativity to make new design. Despite Glynn making it clear that she and Saphentite are not dating and that they are just co-workers, Arania doesn't listen and tries to seduce him. Fortunately, before Arania can come closer to Glynn, Thessalia arrives there at great speed and rescues Glynn. She cuts the silk rope that was tying Glynn and pulls him away from Arania. She tells Arania that she has been following her and keeping an eye on her activities for a long time. However, Arania is well aware of the fact that Thessalia also likes Glynn and wants to marry him. Reminding Thessalia about the same thing, Arania compares herself with Thessalia and tells her that they're the same. Hearing this, Thessalia gets angry and mentions that she's different from her, as she genuinely likes Glynn and has no secret motive behind it. Out of nowhere, both of the girls prepare to fight against one another for the sake of Dr. Glynn. Luckily, before they can harm each other, Saphentite arrives there, grabs Dr. Glynn, and confronts Thessalia and Arania for their immature behavior. The scene then shifts to the clinic, where Saphentite is sitting with the doctor, drinking wine. Here, she confesses her love for the doctor and tells him that she's not afraid about Arania liking him and trying to get close. However, Saphentite states that she feels jealous when Thessalia comes close to him, and she doesn't like it. Eventually, Saphentite also tells Glynn that she's looking for his reply and is not compelled to reciprocate similar feeling. Right when they're talking, they hear a big loud thumping sound and rush outside to find out the real cause. Outside, they meet with the head of the village and get to know that the giant goddess, Gigas, is making her way toward the village. The old man also tells them that the previous gods buried Gigas under the earth and are unaware of his sudden return. She then asks the harpies for help and requests that they carry the citizens of their village to a safe place, after sending everyone away for help and to save the people from impending danger. In the next scene, we can clearly see Thessalia walking alone to fight against the god and save the village. Luckily, before Thessalia can approach the Gigas alone and fight against her to impress Dr. Glynn, Saphentite and Glynn stop her from going to the forest all alone. Saphentite confronts Thessalia for her actions and asks her why she's doing so. Thessalia tells tells her that she's doing all this to minimize the injuries and impress Dr. Glenn. Hearing this, Saphentite becomes enraged and gets ready to fight Tessalia. However, Dr. Glenn intervenes in time and suggests that they work together to face Gigas and save the village from destruction. Surprisingly, Tessalia also agrees with his decision and is ready to help. Moments later, without the group knowing, Gigas comes closer to them and sneezes, indicating that her health's not so good. When Glenn inquires about his visit, Gigas replies that he's very disturbed by his condition and is there to meet a doctor who claims to treat his condition at any cost. Dr. Glenn immediately takes the case. Glenn is still surprised to know that his unconventional method of treating has become so famous that people from different parts of the world have started to visit him. Later, when Gigas makes Glenn clear about her health and asks him to treat her, Glenn is compelled to look after her. He then gets on a tall structure, specially designed to help Glenn treat Gigas, and deduces that Gigas is actually suffering from a common cold. During his attempt to get down after her treatment, he slips from the structure and falls between Gigas' giant chest, making her feel ticklish. In the following scene, Glenn provides Gigas with some medicine and also requests Arhania to sew some warm clothes for her, aiming to keep Gigas warm all the time. Arhania also happily accepts the offer and gets ready to make some warm clothes for Gigas with the Harpy's help. Soon, she successfully prepares a full body dress for Gigas, making her happy and comfortable. The village chief apologizes to Gigas for misunderstanding her as a destroyer before she leaves. Gigas expresses her happiness in getting a chance to meet the doctor in person and promises to visit the village often. After Gigas leaves, Saphentite tells Glenn that now they should return to their clinic and reopen it. A few days pass by and Glenn can be seen working at his clinic. Right then, Illy arrives at the window and provides Glenn with a letter from Tessalia. She also discloses that she has started working for the Cynthia transportation service. Later at night, Tessalia and Glenn are at a restaurant having dinner, which Tessalia takes as a date. Here, Glenn apologizes to Tessalia for troubling her during their trip to the Harpy village, but Tessalia replies that it's her pleasure to help him. She also explains how she got the courage to risk her life to save the village people from Gigas. Glenn really praises her for showing such an attitude and mentions that she is definitely great. Sadly, at the same time, Tessalia notices Saphentite keeping an eye on her. She urges Saphentite to give them some privacy, but Saphentite refuses to leave, stating that she's there to look after her doctor. However, she also appreciates Tessalia for being ready to face goddess Gigas all alone for the sake of the villagers. Hearing this, Tessalia declares that Saphentite accepted the defeat, but to her dismay, Saphentite refuses it and gets ready to fight against her. The scene then shifts to another day, when Glenn and Saphentite attend the Marrow Waterways commemorative ceremony. They're welcomed by Skady, and she also praises the two for their valuable contribution to looking after the monster's health condition. At the same time, Glenn takes a look at Skady's tail and notices something weird. Arhania is also invited to the ceremony, since she's the head of designing clothes for the monster girls. Glenn then looks around the ceremony and notices that Thule is again absent at the ceremony. Moving on, when Skady addresses the crowd at the start of the ceremony, she explains the reason why she named the city after the name of a dragon. Suddenly, in the middle of her speech, Skady loses consciousness and falls to the ground, making everyone worry. Glenn and Saphentite also notice this, and they immediately rush to provide her with first aid. As they are not Skady's regular physicians and have no idea about her previous health problems, Skady does not regain consciousness despite them trying to provide her with preliminary care. The following day, leaving Skady at the hospital, Glenn and Saphentite visit their senior at Skady's regular physician, Thule, to ask her about Skady's health history. Saphentite is, however, worried about Skady trying to seduce Glenn and flirt with him. Seeing her get worried, Glenn clears that Thule is just his senior and has no interest in him. He also adds that they are visiting her just to gather more information about Skady and figure out ways to treat her. As expected, when Glenn and Saphentite knock at Thule's door, she grabs the doctor by his body and starts teasing him. Saphentite tries her best to free Glenn from Thule's capture and succeeds after a couple of failed attempts. Thule becomes very happy to see her young disciples and soon starts discussing Skady's miserable health. Thule thanks Glenn and Saphentite for giving preliminary aid to Skady and thanks them for being there at that point in time. She then reveals to them that Skady actually collapsed because of the fluctuations in her blood pressure, and she knew all about this. Thule further explains that Skady has been suffering from a rare disease called dragon cancer and has been refusing to get a cure for it for a very long time. She mentions that Skady wants to get consumed by the disease and ultimately die because of it. Moving on, she expresses her frustration at being unable to figure out the root cause of the disease and helps Skady recover from it. Before Glenn and Saphentite leave, Thule tells Glenn that Skady has an abnormality in her heart and believes that it cannot be cured. Later in the evening, Kunai, Skady's personal bodyguard, visits Dr. Glenn's clinic and asks him to have a look at her master Skady's condition. Though Thule is Skady's friend and respects her decision of not getting cured, Kunai wants Glenn to go beyond Skady's desire and try to cure her. Kunai also makes it clear that she does not want to lose her master and will do anything in her ability to try and save her. She then invites Glenn for Skady's medical treatment and takes full responsibility to arrange for it. Following this, Glenn and Saphentite are taken outside Skady's personal bedroom, and despite Saphentite's willingness to assist Glenn, Kunai only allows Glenn to go inside. Glenn carefully enters the bedroom and looks for Skady before finding her standing near a window. He gets surprised to see her real face for the first time and notices that she is a young female dragon. Skady then inquires with Dr. Glenn about his visit. Glenn replies that he's there at Kunai's request to treat her. At first, Skady refuses to get treatment, but when she realizes that she's troubled Kunai, she agrees to have one remove her outer dress, revealing a tumor on her chest. Glenn is shocked to see a big blue tumor right in the middle of her chest and realizes that this is what Thule was talking about. Next, Glenn requests to feel the tumor, and reluctantly, Skady agrees. She then begins telling Glenn about her unwillingness to treat the tumor, as she believes that it's due to her ancestors' immoral behavior towards society. She accepts the fact that she needs to suffer for her ancestors' behavior and can do nothing to cure the tumor. However, after feeling the parts of the tumor for some time, Glenn deduces that it's made of the same tissue as her scale. He then begins feeling her outer scales and moves on to her tail. Because of the sensual touches from Dr. Glenn, Skady feels some tickling and she starts to moan. Glenn moves on to caressing her dragon tail, and Skady tells him that it lowers itself when she's not feeling well. Surprisingly, when Glenn starts stroking the base of her tail, Skady can't take any more of it and starts crying. Hearing her master cry, Kunai enters the room, holding a sharp knife in her hand. Kunai gets even more enraged, seeing Skady without her dress. Saphentite also enters the room with Kunai and expresses her anger at Dr. Glenn. Fortunately, before Kunai can attack Dr. Glenn, Skady stops her and tells her that she's just fine. She then walks away from there, informing everyone that she just needs to take a rest. In the next scene, Glenn and Saphentite visit Thule and tell her the condition of Skady's tumor. Glenn also explains to her the treatment procedure he's figured out. He mentions that they need to remove the tumor, and as it is attached to a lot of blood vessels, they need to immediately stitch them before Skady loses a lot of blood. Thule appreciates the procedure he's put forward, but is worried about Skady providing them with her permission to treat her. She also tells Glenn that Skady is a very difficult person to get permission from. Hearing this, Glenn assures Thule that he will get permission from Skady and is just looking for Thule's help in obtaining it. When Skady asks him why he thinks so, Glenn says that he's well aware of Thule's attachment to her and her willingness to save her at any cost. Thule gets emotional after hearing this and feels proud of her students getting so matured. Later, while they're discussing Skady's surgery, Thule tells them that they will need another person to assist them, especially the one who's good at stitching and can follow her instruction. As soon as she says so, Glenn remembers Arhania and suggests the same to Thule. Next, Saphentite and Glenn visit Arhania at her stitching company and approach her asking for help. At first, Arhania refuses to get involved, fearing the situation if they fail. But when Saphentite tells her that she will get a chance to wear a uniform like her, she instantly agreed. While Glenn and Saphentite are inside the factory, the female workers are attracted to handsome Glenn and start fantasizing about romancing him. After getting Arhania's confirmation, Glenn and Saphentite walk away from there, and on their way back, try to figure out ways to persuade Skady to have the surgery. The following day, Kunai visits Skady in her chamber and asks her to take on the surgery, but to her dismay, Skady kindly refuses and walks away, mentioning that she doesn't want to live anymore. On the other hand, Glenn visits an instrument workshop where all of the hospital's equipment is made. Here, he runs into a beautiful female worker, Meme, who is a cyclop and seems to have a crush on Dr. Glenn. Meme is a shy girl and worries while walking beside Dr. Glenn. While taking Glenn to meet her master, Kuklo, Meme gets stuck into a needle and gets her clothes torn, revealing her private part. Surprisingly, despite a lot of other people around her, she slaps Glenn, accusing him of looking at her during an embarrassing moment. Soon, they visit Kuklo, and Glenn provides him with a list of instruments that they will need to perform Skady's surgery. At first, Kuklo refuses to take the order, but when Glenn mentions that the city hospital will bear all the expenses and also provide them with the necessary materials, he immediately agrees. He's also happy to get an opportunity to help their city head, Skady, get better. Right then, Kuklo turns to Meme and provides provides her with the responsibility to make needles for the surgery. Meme is afraid to accept the job, assuming that she'll be chased away from the city if the needles turn out to be of bad quality. Hearing this, Kuklo suggests she think positively and work with full dedication to avoid such situation. Meanwhile, Arhania is at the doctor's clinic, where she can be seen practicing stitching on kunai. After a few days, Kuklo provides Thule and Glenn with the first batch of the instrument and tells them that the needles are being made by Meme and will take some time. Thule checks on the instruments and mentions that she's impressed with the quality and is looking forward to the needles. The scene then shifts to Meme, who is trying her best to make the best quality needles for Skady's surgery. After a number of failed attempts, Meme takes a closer look at the machines nearby and collapses to the ground. Glenn gets the information about Meme and immediately rushes to the workshop. Without wasting any time, he checks on Meme and suggests that she needs to be taken to the clinic. Here, we are shown some flashbacks about how Skady's speech motivated Meme to be a craftsman and work at the warehouse. Sometime later, Meme gets back consciousness and thanks Glenn for taking care of her. However, when she notices herself naked, she feels embarrassed and yells at the doctor. Glenn tries to make her understand that he did all this to ease her breath and get better. Seeing this, Glenn behaves nicely with Meme. Arhania expresses her desire to be a patient. Next, Glenn performs another round of checks on Meme and deduces that she didn't get sick because of drinking alcohol, but due to continuously looking at the repetitive motion. He also mentions that since Cyclops have 3 circular canals in their ears, they feel movement and hallucinate while moving at high speed and gazing at objects with repetitive motion. After hearing this, Meme discloses that when she was working at the workshop, trying to figure out a new procedure to make quality and flexible needles, she successfully discovered a way to make needles but got zoned out looking at the continuous motion of the machine. Following this, Meme takes Glenn and the rest to the workshop and apologizes to Kuklo before showing them the procedure to mass-produce the quality needles for the surgery. Kuklo appreciates her hard work and praises her for figuring out a new way to manufacture surgery needles. Arhania tests the needles and declares them to be effective and easy to use. Before leaving, Glenn suggests Meme focus on her work and worry less about her work and surrounding. After a few days, all of the necessary preparations for Skady's surgery are complete, except for the confirmation of the patient herself. Glenn visits her multiple times to persuade her, but Skady continues refusing, stating that she has no desire to live anymore. Moving on, while Glenn is working at the city hospital, Saphentite, Arhania, and Thessalia visit a nearby pub to celebrate the girls' night out. Here, Saphentite thanks Thessalia for helping them out with the anesthesia for Skady's surgery. She mentions that as they do not have any medical history with the dragons, Thessalia's transportation company helped them find the ingredients from the Far East and deliver them to them. Following this, Thessalia asks Arhania if she still remembers the questions she asked her when they met in the forest for the first time. Arhania replies with a yes and still doubts if Thessalia loves Glenn. Furthermore, she mentions that she can easily find out the reasons for 2 people getting attracted to and having feelings for one another, even between girls. The girls then enjoy their time drinking and return late to the clinic. Later at night, when Arhania tries to steal a precious item from Glenn, Saphentite arrives and catches her red-handed. Here, Arhania tries to defend herself at first, but when Saphentite starts confronting her for her filthy behavior, she throws the item in her hand in the other direction and jumps from the window, trying to get away. To her bad luck, she finds Thessalia waiting for her outside. At this moment, Arhania discloses that she has a very bad behavior of getting attached to other persons' belongings, especially the ones her friends are very passionate about. Moreover, she also states that she just wants to co-own the items and cannot see her friends being happy alone. Next, Thessalia and Saphentite take Arhania inside the clinic, where she apologizes and asks them to not hand her over to the authority. She also mentions that she'll work with full dedication till the surgery and will try to improve her habits. After this, Thessalia and Saphentite talk to Arhania and tell her that since she's trying to steal Glenn from Saphentite, she's probably suffering from love sickness. Hearing this, Arhania gets perplexed at first, but later, when Saphentite mentions that she and Thessalia have been suffering from it for a long time, she calms down. Moving on to the next scene, Glenn again visits Skady at her mansion and finds her looking over the city of Lindworm. She asks Glenn why he keeps on visiting her, and he replies that he will continue doing so till he succeeds in persuading her for the surgery. Here, Skady asks Glenn to carry her and tells him the history of Lindworm. She reveals to him how much she worked hard to create the city where monsters and humans can live happily. She says that she came down from the sky and transformed into a human-like form to end the war and develop a city without war. As she has succeeded in doing so, she mentions that she has no will to live anymore. After hearing her out, Glenn informs her about Kunai, who is very worried about her health, Thule, who was racking her brain to find a cure for her tumor, Lulala, who was praying for her good health, and the citizens of Lindworm, who just want their leader to stand in front of them. Eventually, Glenn tells Skady that everyone wants her to remain alive, and she should be there to see the further enhancements in the city she created a long time before. Surprisingly, as soon as Glenn finishes telling this, Skady looks at Glenn with surprise on her face and agrees to undergo the surgery. She also asks Glenn about the things that a normal girl would do, and Glenn gives her ideas about shopping, buying gems, finding a partner, and many more. In the following scene, Thule and the crew prepare for the surgery and lay Skady on the operation table. As Thule leads the surgery process, she instructs everyone to focus on their work. Outside, we can see the people of Lindworm praying for their leader to get back on her throne as soon as possible. Soon, the surgery begins and Thule cuts the tumor. At first, Skady's body reacts normally, but as she is a fire dragon, some poisonous gases originate inside her body, increasing her body temperature and burning her internal organs. Seeing this, Thule suggests Arhania and Saphentite go away from there and mentions that she and Glenn will handle the situation. Before her tentacles get burned to ashes, Thule and Glenn work hand in hand and successfully remove the tumor. Moments later, the news about Skady's successful surgery is announced to the city residents, and they all become very happy about it. The next day, Skady appears in front of Lindworm residents and reveals her face for the first time. She also gives a little speech, thanking everyone for praying for her well-being, and also promises to work hard for the betterment of the city in the future. Before she departs from the stage, she also asks the people to take care of her. After the speech, Skady approaches Kunai and inquires about Dr. Glenn. She tells Kunai that she wants to meet Glenn and believes he's the one who ignited the fire inside her to live and watch the development of the city she built. To her dismay, Kunai informs her that Glenn is at his clinic, looking after the sick Saphentite. Despite this, Skady does not stop and runs toward the clinic. On the other hand, Glenn can be seen looking after Saphentite and providing her with hot water to drink. He also informs her that she needs to focus on keeping her body warm as she's suffering from a cold. However, when Glenn notices Saphentite moving her head around and feeling uneasy, he asks her to show him the inside part of her mouth. At first, Saphentite refuses to do so, but when Dr. Glenn grabs her face and requests, she melts down and agrees. On checking the inside of Saphentite's mouth, Glenn finds some wounds on her tongue, deduces that Saphentite is actually suffering from a mouth ulcer. He then immediately brings honey and applies it all over her tongue, mentioning that honey is the best medicine for mouth ulcers. After this, Glenn requests Saphentite to take a rest and also assures her that he'll be back home in time and they'll have dinner together. In the next scene, while Glenn is on his way to the clinic, he meets Skady and Kunai at the market, waiting for their carriage to get fixed. Suddenly, when Skady sees Glenn, she runs toward him and hugs him tight. Furthermore, she also asks him to come and play with her, addressing him as Big Brother. Kunai tries to stop her from behaving immaturely in public, but Skady doesn't listen to her and lifts her clothes, stating that he's the one who cured her and gave her a new life. Glenn also tells her that he's on his way to treating the patients at the clinic and can't play with her. Moments later, Meme arrives there and talks to Glenn. She also notices the damaged carriage and offers to help. Here, Kunai recognizes Meme as the one who made the needles for Skady's surgery and tells the same to Skady. Soon after Meme repairs the carriage, Skady approaches her and thanks her for her help. She also leaves 2 barrels of wine for both Glenn and Meme before leaving the place in the carriage. Following this, Glenn also rushes to the clinic, handing over the barrel's responsibility to Meme. Alone, Meme looks after the barrel and waits for someone to arrive for help. Meanwhile, Arhania helps Saphentite to take a bath and mentions that when she's sick, she can flirt with Glenn all alone. Hearing this, Saphentite gets angry and calls Arhania to prepare the dinner. In the next scene, we can see Gigas at the Harpies' village, protecting them from a landslide. In return, the chief of the village offers some harvested foods to Gigas, but surprisingly, she has also brought a huge amount of fruits for the village people. Later in the evening, Glenn returns from the clinic and finds Meme guarding the barrels at the side of the road. He thanks Meme for doing this and, before she gets angry, calls Lorna, Kay, and Tassalia with their carriage. He then puts a barrel on Lorna's carriage and greets Meme before Lorna pulls her away at great speed. On the other hand, Tassalia carries Glenn and takes him towards his house, with Kay accompanying her. On their way to Glenn's house, Lorna tries to flirt with Glenn and tells him that when he's free, they need to arrange a date. She also mentions that her father will return home next week and suggests Glenn get ready for a formal marriage interview. Glenn, however, tells Tassalia that he respects her feelings but doesn't think it would be a good idea to arrange for a marriage interview. Back at Saphentite's apartment, Arhania suggests Saphentite worry less about the doctor and live a stress-free life. Despite this, Saphentite cannot stop herself from assuming that while she's not with Glenn, someone else might have approached him and proposed to him. Right then, Illy arrives there with her friends and has brought the food for Dr. Glenn from their village. Saphentite gets surprised to see such a huge quantity of food and mentions that they may be unable to finish such a huge amount. At the same time, Illy inquires about the doctor, and before Saphentite can say that Glenn is out of the clinic, Glenn arrives there and calls Saphentite. As soon as Illy and the other harpies see Glenn, they hurtle around him and become very happy. Seeing this, Saphentite gets jealous and moves them to the side and greets the doctor. Glenn then inquires about her health and requests her to take a rest. Next, he opens the door and we can see Kay and Tassalia waiting for him inside. Glenn shows Saphentite the foods that he obtained from the well-wishers and the wine barrel that Skady gifted him earlier. Right then, Skady also arrives with Kunai and tells them that she has brought the Lindworm's famous dragon dumpling for Glenn. Moments later, Meme and her workshop team show up at Glenn's house, and Kuklo informs Glenn that they are there to celebrate and drink wine with him and others. Seeing the number of people around and the food they have, Glenn also quickly agrees to have a celebration. Moving on to the next scene, everyone gathers around a park and starts enjoying the night, drinking and eating delicious food. Saphentite, Tassalia, and Arhania count themselves as rivals to win Glenn's heart, and also assume that they have got a new competitor, pointing at Skady. At the same time, Skady approaches Glenn and tells him that she's really grateful for the surgery. She mentions that because of the surgery, she's got a new perspective of looking towards people and being familiar with them. She again addresses him as Big Brother and comes closer to him. Saphentite can be seen looking at this and immediately grabs Glenn by her tail. She then confronts him for leaving her alone at home despite her being sick. Later, when she asks Glenn to have a look at her tongue to check the condition of her ulcer, Tassalia intervenes and yells at Saphentite for taking advantage of Glenn. In the last scene, while Saphentite and Tassalia fight for Dr. Glenn, Skady arrives there and pulls him away to play with her. The episode ends with Skady, Saphentite, Tassalia, and Arhania running after the doctor and pouncing on him one by one.